This man is struggling to get his suitcase into the hotel elevator, but why is it so heavy? Just hours earlier, he rode up that same elevator together with his Tinder date, 22-year-old Grace Millane. Watch how the pair leave the elevator. This would be the last time a CCTV camera caught Grace alive. The next morning, only one of the two would walk out of the hotel room 308, step into the same elevator, look directly into that CCTV camera, and go on a frantic run through hardware stores to buy an enormously large suitcase, strong cleaning supplies, and finally a red shovel. What unfolded in the next 48 hours shocked even the most seasoned detectives. Where is Grace Millane? Why is her Tinder date struggling to push a massive suitcase while fleeing the hotel? And most importantly, why is he acting so strange during the interrogation? Before we begin, we would like to extend our deepest sympathies to the family and loved ones of the victim in this case, Grace Millane. On the 2nd of December 2018, Grace Millane's phone was buzzing nonstop with text messages and calls from her friends. It was her 22nd birthday, and even though she was away from home, they all wanted to send her their best wishes. Unfortunately, they soon realized that something was wrong.
I messaged her on Snapchat saying happy birthday, hope you're having a lovely time, and, not getting a reply for a few days.
But it wasn't just Grace's friends that didn't hear from her.
The fact that on her birthday, she hadn't contacted her family, and the family had not been able to contact her. That was a huge red flag.
It was unlike Grace to go off the grid without a word to anyone, and so this was the first sign that something was terribly wrong.
When it came out that she hadn't, responded to anyone, hadn't called anyone, I think that's when sort of the worry started to set in.
Originally from Wickford, Essex, Grace had arrived in New Zealand on the 20th of November, 2018. New Zealand was one of the many countries she had planned to explore during her trip around the world. After spending 10 days exploring the Upper North Island, she ventured into Auckland on November 30th. By every indication, Grace was enjoying the holiday season despite being away from her family. She was excited to make new friends and embark on new adventures. Unknown to her, she would never make it out of Auckland. On the 5th of December, a little over 72 hours since they last heard from her, Grace's family back in England decided it was time to sound the alarm.
It was just after lunchtime. I'd walked down into the crime squad office, which is the floor below where my office is, and I was talking to their detective senior sergeant, and she actually said, "We've got a missing person complaint come in."
In New Zealand, some of the backpackers Grace had come in contact with had also realized that she was missing, and they rallied together to help find her. After all, she was one of their own. A few days after her disappearance, Grace's father flew to New Zealand, determined to do whatever he could to facilitate the search for his daughter. With each passing minute, news of Grace's disappearance continued to spread like wildfire. In no time, the international community caught wind of it, and this marked the beginning of a media storm.
The social media reaction has to be some of the biggest I can remember.
Whether it was news articles, regular Facebook posts, getting her face out there.
The Auckland police were under immense pressure. They had to find Grace, and they had to do it fast.
Time was the essence. We needed to get onto this.
As the investigation progressed, authorities decided to delve into Grace's life through the only window available.
A lot of the young people live on social media. So getting into her Facebook page and seeing what she'd been doing was crucial.
Like many people her age, Grace used her social media accounts to give her friends and followers daily updates about her activities. Police were also able to discover the exact date she entered New Zealand, the places she had visited, and the hostel she had been staying in prior to her disappearance. As investigators continued to go through Grace's social media, they came across a particular comment that stood out from the rest.
We'd found on Grace's Facebook page, the last person to comment was from a Jessie Shane. Now, we didn't know who that was.
The comment read, "Beautiful, very radiant." This was the first time Jessie's name would come up in the investigation, and it was most certainly not the last. Once police found Jesse's comment on Grace's page, they immediately swung into action. The first step was to identify him. To do so, an unnamed member of the force reached out to him via Facebook and managed to find out his full name, Jesse Shane Kempson. What the police couldn't find out by going through Grace's social media posts, they were determined to uncover through other means.
We had an investigation team doing a lot of work, and one of the phases is the CCTV phase, which is critical in Auckland City.
Auckland is known to have CCTV cameras in nearly all major areas and shops. Footage obtained from these cameras would turn out to be instrumental in unraveling the mystery of what happened to Grace Millane.
I was tasked straight away as the officer in charge of CCTV inquiries. It was footage that needed to be reviewed minute by minute.
While investigators were busy poring over several hours of CCTV footage, an unlikely visitor walked through the doors at the station.
His real name was Jesse Shane Kempson. The next day, he contacts the police.
The same man who had been the last person to leave a comment on Grace's Facebook post had stopped by for a chat with the authorities.
That's in relation to a young lady, Grace Millane.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's her there, you recognise her?
Yep.
After confirming that he had indeed met and interacted with Grace the previous week, Jesse proceeded to share the details of their time together.
So I was talking to Grace on Tinder. We'd matched on Friday. I saw that we'd matched the next day on Saturday.
At the time that this ill-fated match was made, Grace had no idea that she had swiped right on the devil.
I saw a message from her saying, hey. So I messaged back saying, hey, how are you? How's your day going? And she told me that she was going to be spending her birthday out there the next day.
From that point, the conversation progressed rapidly.
I said, I know it's quick, but do you want to catch up for a drink? And she said, yep, cool. She asked me where. I said, Sky City.
At the time that Jesse visited the station, investigators had no idea when exactly Grace was last seen, and so they had to rely on his statement. For the most part, he seemed to be telling the truth, but even then, the detectives could tell that something was not right.
Throughout the interview, some of the things early on were a little bit odd, but some people are odd.
In line with Jesse's version of events, CCTV footage showed that Grace left Base Backpackers Hostel, where she was staying, around 5:37 p.m. that evening. At around 5:40 p.m., while Grace was on her way to the meeting spot they had agreed on, Jesse was caught on the CCTV cameras in a local bar called the Bluestone Room. The footage showed him downing a total of 4 bottles of beer, perhaps in a bid to gain some courage to forge ahead with his evil plan. 8 minutes after she left her hostel, at around 5:45 p.m., Grace met Jesse under the Sky Tower.
And then we met. I gave her a hug. She gave me a hug. And then we decided that we were going up to Andy's Burger Bar.
The visit to Andy's Burger Bar marked the beginning of a very eventful night, one that started out as a restaurant and bar hopping. After spending about half an hour in their first location, Grace and Jesse decided to head over to another spot. They made their way to a Mexican cafe and arrived at about 7:16 p.m. They stayed for a while, had a few drinks, and then decided to head out. Up until this point, Jesse's account of the events that unfolded that night had been somewhat consistent with the contents of the CCTV footage, but that was about to change.
How did the evening sort of come to an end?
There was a hug and a kiss on the cheek.
So at this point, you guys are heading in the direction of Victoria Street.
Yeah, to the crossing. Yeah.
The crossing.
Yeah.
So you cross over, and then you've parted company at around about 8 p.m.
Yeah.
After reiterating that he left Grace by 8 p.m., Jesse went on to describe a night of solo adventure that began right after he left her.
It was the intersection.
Yeah.
So I just crossed. That would have been the last place I saw her. There's a pub on Queen Street.
And how many drinks do you think you had in that place?
I would say 10.
Jesse also told police a little about his activities the next morning.
After that, I remember waking up the next day.
What time was that?
I woke up 9-10 o'clock.
Although the police did not know it at first, at some point, Jesse had started to feed them a version of events that was nothing but lies. Unfortunately for him, before the interview was over, investigators had made significant progress with the CCTV footage analysis, enough to know that he was telling lies.
You said you woke up in your apartment at about 9 or 10 a.m.
Yep.
on Sunday morning?
Yep.
And you knew that was the time because you checked your phone?
Yep.
Is that you?
Yes.
Jesse continued to answer the officer's questions. Unknown to him, the next question would mark the beginning of his undoing.
That picture, picture is in your hotel lift.
Yeah.
Okay, that's on Sunday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
In a matter of moments, the stack of lies Jesse had taken his time to build had come crashing down.
You haven't told the truth.
Is there something you want to ask?
At this point, it had become clear to investigators that Jesse was the #1 suspect in Grace's disappearance.
Now, we know he's a liar, but we didn't have any evidence that he had done anything to Grace. Yes, he had lied to us, but that's all we had, him telling us a lie.
In most criminal investigations, the evidence helps authorities find the perpetrator. In this case, the police had found their guy. Now they needed evidence, lots of it. In the meantime, they had to let Jesse go, because even though they suspected he was guilty, they had nothing to prove it. The first step to proving Jesse had a hand in Grace's disappearance was to look through all available CCTV footage and piece together a timeline of the events that unfolded during the Tinder date. It was from this timeline that police learned that, contrary to Jesse's claims, the two had not parted ways around 8 p.m. They had actually visited a third location together, a bar called Bluestone Room. By the time the pair arrived at the Bluestone, it had been a few hours since they first got together, and it appeared that the alcohol they had consumed earlier had started to kick in. They looked to be more at ease with each other and were openly making out. At one point, Jesse excused himself from the table, and Grace immediately pulled out her phone. She took the opportunity to send a message to a friend of hers. In the next few moments, Grace and her friend exchanged pleasantries, and then just before Jesse returned to the table, Grace sent her friend one last text. Unknown to Grace, this would be the last time she would make contact with any of her loved ones. When Jesse and Grace decided to call it a night and head out into the street together, it was already past 9 p.m.
When they get to the opposite side, there's a point where Grace has the option of going to the right and heading back to her accommodation at the base Packbackers, or heading towards City Life Hotel, where Jesse Kempson stays.
Grace did not return to her hostel that night.
As it turns out, Grace continued on with Jesse.
It was less than 3 hours into her 22nd birthday, and Grace was looking forward to ushering in her new age in the company of her new friend. She didn't know that her life would soon be tragically cut short.
They enter into one of the lifts at the City Life Hotel and head up to level 3 where Jesse has his apartment. This is the last sighting that we have of Grace.
At around 8 a.m. on December 2nd, 2018, 11 hours after Grace and Jesse were caught on camera entering City Life Hotel, Jesse was spotted entering one of the lifts at the hotel alone. Where was Grace? And why was Jesse up and about so early? Immediately after he exited City Life Hotel, Jesse made his way to Atrium Shopping Center on Elliott Street to make a rather unusual purchase. A few minutes later, he was caught on camera returning to his room in City Life with an unusually large suitcase. This was just the start of many suspicious errands. After dropping off the suitcase in his room, Jesse quickly returned to the city. This time his destination was Countdown Metro, and he was looking to buy cleaning supplies. In less than 20 minutes, Jesse returned to his hotel room with his supplies. At around 10:33 a.m., he was caught on camera leaving the hotel for a third time. This time, he got into a taxi and headed to Apex Car Rentals to pick up a small Toyota. In the midst of what can only be described as a crime caught almost entirely on camera, Jesse managed to squeeze out time to visit a popular hangout spot called Revelry. The true nature of this visit would be revealed months later. After the visit to Revelry, Jesse went back to Countdown, this time to rent a Rug Doctor carpet cleaning machine, which he took back to his hotel room. Later that evening, Jesse loaded 2 suitcases and a sports bag onto a hotel luggage trolley. He then took the trolley out of his room, into the elevator, and out of the hotel. He then loaded the bags into the trunk and proceeded to leave them there overnight. At the time, no one was aware of the horrifying nature of the bag's contents. Jesse left the bags in the trunk of the rental overnight, and then the next morning, a little after 6 a.m., he drove out of the city to West Auckland. He made a stop at the ITM in Kumeu to make yet another unusual purchase. Jesse bought a red shovel. Jesse's activities from the morning of December 2nd up until the evening of December 3rd were suspicious enough for the authorities to take the next step.
That Thursday night, we arranged for a search warrant for his apartment at City Life Hotel.
In addition to the regular search procedure, forensic scientists were brought in to examine the space.
The forensic scientists were going to test Kempson's apartment for blood, and they used a chemical called luminol, which they spray. Luminol will react with blood and it will glow in the dark.
It was during this examination that they discovered what Jesse had done.
When you see the inside of Kempson's apartment and you see the luminol, which is indicating all the blood in that room, you go, oh my gosh, what's he done?
Further investigation revealed even more shocking investigation.
We also received more information that his phone had been polling out in the Waitakere Ranges on the Monday.
The Waitakere Ranges is a mountain range in New Zealand, located in West Auckland between metropolitan Auckland and the Tasman Sea. It is also the perfect place to hide a body. Armed with this new knowledge, the police brought in Jesse Shane Kempson for questioning, and in a shocking twist, he had an entirely different story to tell, a story that would shock the nation.
Tell me what happened last Saturday.
This time around, Jesse's account of how the Tinder date went was consistent with the CCTV footage. He shared details about the different locations they visited and what drinks they had. However, when he began to speak of their time alone behind closed doors, things got much darker.
The next thing I remember after that is being in the room with Grace. She started talking to me about 50 Shades of Grey, a fantasy movie.
From this point on, things only got darker.
We started having, I guess, violent sex, and then she told me to hold her throat.
Jesse told police that after the encounter, he headed to the bathroom and then fell asleep there. He claimed that he remained there until the next morning.
I woke up the next day. I saw that she was lying on the floor. I saw that she had blood coming from her nose.
When he woke up the next morning, Jesse claims he was not prepared for what he saw.
I screamed, I yelled out at her, and I tried to move her to see if she was awake, and she was cold.
Grace was dead. Jesse made sure to reiterate over and over again how frightened he was when he discovered Grace's body, but the interviewing officer quickly pointed out that he failed to seek help. He didn't call 111. The truth about what Jesse did while Grace lay there came to light much later, and it left many terrified at just how heartless he was.
You said you didn't know what to do. Why did you purchase a suitcase?
Because I was freaking out.
At this point, Jesse had confessed to finding Grace dead and doing nothing about it, but the most shocking part was still to come.
Remember putting Grace in the suitcase? I put Grace in the back of a hire car. I picked up a shovel. I ended up driving towards the Waitakares. I went into the bush. I dug a hole.
The jig was up.
To your knowledge, did Grace die while she was in your company?
To my knowledge, I would say yes.
Did you kill Grace Millane? Jesse Kempson, you're under arrest for the murder of Grace Millane.
Now that the truth had come to light, the next step was to comb through the Waitakere in search of Grace's body. With Jesse's cooperation, it wasn't long until...
We located a body which we believe to be Grace. The formal identification process will now take place. However, based on the evidence we have gathered over the past few days, we expect that this is Grace. Obviously, this brings the search for Grace to an end.
While Jesse was being apprehended for the crime he had committed and the evidence was being put together to make a strong case against him, the family of Grace Millane was being forced to grapple with the reality that their daughter was gone. They had to lay her to rest and pay their last respects. The funeral of Grace Millane was held on January 10, 2019, at the Brentwood Cathedral near her home in Essex. Hundreds of mourners, including the lead detective who had worked on the case, gathered outside the church as the hearse bearing her coffin arrived. Grace was gone, but she was living in the hearts of many people. The trial for the murder of Grace Millane began on November 4, 2019, almost a year after her death. A jury of 7 women and 5 men were picked to dissect the trove of evidence against Jesse Shane Kempson and to decide his fate. The prosecution argued that Jesse had knowingly strangled his Tinder date, Grace, to death while they were having sex. They believed that Grace was killed sometime after 9:40 p.m. on the night of December 1st.
The defendant had to have had her under his grip at some point of which she lost consciousness and he had to carry on.
On the other hand, Jesse's defense team worked hard to make it look like the death was an accident. They argued that Grace was interested in bondage and sadomasochism, and her interests led to her accidental demise.
Miss Millane died as a result of what they consensually engaged in during their time together.
As the trial continued to unfold, the court of public opinion reached a conclusion that was almost unanimous.
Personally, I think the defence is horrendous. I don't see how anyone could ever use that as a legitimate defence.
The prosecution saw the attempt by Jesse's lawyers to portray his actions as a mistake for the sham that it was and quickly set out to dismantle it. They did so by telling the court about Jesse's line of action after killing Grace. Investigations showed that minutes after Grace died, he picked up his phone, but he didn't do what a person who had accidentally committed murder would do. He didn't dial 111. Instead, he did a number of things with the phone that would turn out to be proof of his guilt. Jesse began searching the web for possible ways to dispose of a body. He searched for Waitakere ranges and hot as fire in hopes of finding the perfect way to dispose of Grace's body and keep his crime hidden. After a few minutes of searching, the killer turned his mind to other things. He carried out an act so despicable that gasps filled the courtroom when it was revealed.
Ms. Millane's lifeless body was with you in that room when you searched for and accessed 4 sites. These were not the actions of a man in panic, far from it. Your actions reveal a complete disregard for your victim.
After that, Jesse went ahead to take intimate close-up pictures of Grace's lifeless body. Although there are several reasons why he may have done that, the most likely explanation is that he intended to use the pictures for his gratification later. It is also possible that he wanted to keep them as some sort of trophy.
He has eroticised the death of British backpacker Grace Millane, which occurred under his handhold and on her birthday.
As the prosecution showed the horrifying images to the court, Grace's mother could no longer bear the emotional torment, and so she stood up and left the courtroom. The courtroom was in a perpetual state of shock as more and more evidence against Jesse was revealed. The prosecutors described Jesse time and time again as a pervert who used Tinder as a safe space to solicit for sex. To prove that Jesse's actions were premeditated, the The court heard the testimony of 3 women who had had encounters with Jesse via Tinder and what they had experienced during their interactions with him. The first woman to testify worked as a waitress at the City Life Hotel where he was staying, and that was how they met. She stated that 2 weeks before Grace was murdered, she had gone out on a date with Jesse. She admitted that for months they had been texting and talking about their shared interest in intimacy. She also said that they had lived out their fantasy, which included choking. This established the fact that Jesse was interested in intimacy, and it was not something new to him like he had told investigators. The court also heard from another young lady who had testified that she and Jesse had been texting each other. She stated that they had gone as far as exchanging intimate pictures and discussing their preferences over the phone. She told the court that Jesse liked dominating, had a foot fetish, and was into strangulation. Although they had been speaking for a while, the lady confessed that they never met in person. She wasn't comfortable with meeting him in real life due to the things he had said to her and the things he wanted her to do. In a shocking twist, she also revealed that up until December 4th, 3 days after Grace's murder, Jesse continued to send her messages asking for them to go on a date. He just might have been searching for his next victim. The last woman to testify was a university student who had told the court that she had met up with Jesse in November 2018, but the encounter had left her terrified for her life. She said that they had planned to have drinks at a bar, but plans changed. They ended up buying drinks and going back to Jesse's apartment. The date started out normal as they engaged in conversations for over 3 hours. However, within this time, Jesse had told her how he had tracked down his estranged father and how it led him to being chased by members of a gang. He told her how he had gotten into a fight with a man at a nightclub. And lastly, he claimed to know a member of the All Blacks, the New Zealand national rugby union team. As their conversation continued, Jesse slowly changed it to a sexual topic. He began telling the woman that he loved her and wanted to be with her. When she told him that she didn't want to be intimate with him, he led her into his bedroom, where she lay down on his bed. She recounted how Jesse climbed on top of her, held her 2 arms down, and proceeded to put his entire body weight on her face.
I was kicking violently. I was trying to move my arms, and he would have felt me fighting against his arms.
She could not breathe, and he knew about it, but wouldn't move. He was holding her arms down, which made it more difficult for her to push him off of her. After a few seconds of struggling, she came up with an idea she hoped would save her life. Even after she feigned death, it still took Jesse a few more seconds before he moved and she got some air into her lungs. When she asked him why he had done that, he responded saying, "Oh, you don't think I did that on purpose, do you?" While she struggled to come to terms with the near-death experience she just had, Jesse left his guest, went into the bathroom, came back clutching his stomach, and told her that he had cancer. He probably did this to explain away his earlier behavior, but the poor woman was already terrified for her life. Although she had survived that traumatic encounter, she didn't immediately cut ties with Jesse. In fact, they continued to text each other for weeks after the incident. When Jesse's lawyers cross-examined the woman, she said that she kept on communicating with him out of fear that he could one day find her and wreak havoc in her life. As the trial proceeded, the jury was shown CCTV footage of the events that unfolded the day Grace Millane was killed. The footage showed Grace and Jesse on their date, and as the two returned to Jesse's apartment together. CCTV footage shown in court also painted a vivid picture of the events that took place on December 2nd. It showed every step Jesse took to make sure the murder would remain a secret. It was at this point that the truth about Jesse's visit to Revelry came to light. He had stopped by there in the middle of his mad dash to cover his tracks because he had a Tinder date scheduled with a former journalist. The lady Jesse had met with agreed to be one of the prosecution's witnesses. She told the court that sometimes her conversations with Jesse were bizarre. Just as he had lied to Grace that he was a manager, Jesse also lied to his Tinder date saying that all his friends were police officers. He told her that the police were having problems with bodies in the Waitakares because police dogs could not pick up the scent of a body if it was buried about 4 feet deep. In a twisted way, Jesse was divulging his plan to his date to try and gauge her response. He was testing the waters. He also told his date that he had spent the entire day looking for a big duffel bag to keep his sportswear in. He further revealed that he knew of a man who had killed a woman through and strangulation. He tried to secretly make an excuse for what he had done by saying, "It's crazy how guys can make one wrong move and go to jail for the rest of their lives." Jesse's date told the court that by the end of their time together, she was feeling uncomfortable and didn't want Jesse to know that they had parked their cars close to each other. So, instead of walking to her car, she walked to the other side of the road. He had left a strong enough impression on her that when he texted her later that evening to plan another date, she simply declined. Not only had he murdered a person and gone on a date a few hours later, but he was already making plans to go on even more dates. During the trial, the medical examiner who had carried out the autopsy on Grace's body was called to speak on his findings. The examiner's testimony was as disheartening as it was frightening. He stated that during his examination, he found bruises on Grace's shoulders and on the inside of her arms.
They're in the typical location, what we call restraint bruises or restraint marks if someone's being held down or being either by fingers or anything else. That's sort of the location where you might find those injuries.
As the examiner talked about his findings, Grace's mother burst into tears. At this point, Grace's parents had been listening to the gruesome details surrounding their daughter's death for several days, and it was becoming tougher. The examiner told the court that he had found a significant bruise on the left side of Grace's neck.
All I can say that it's been due to pressure on the neck, and that pressure has been applied for long enough for that bruising to occur, and with enough force for that bruising to occur.
It was also revealed that Grace had died due to the pressure applied to her neck. However, the examiner could not determine the exact cause of the pressure.
It can be from manual strangulation, it can be from a ligature, it can be from what we call a choker hold, so when you put the arm right around the neck, or it can be from a forearm bar hold, which is really just the forearm going straight across the neck.
The prosecution then asked him if he had seen any case like that of Grace in which a person had died from strangulation during an encounter. The examiner responded in a way that dealt a significant blow to Jesse's defense strategy.
My point of view is incredibly rare. I personally have never seen a case. I don't know of another case that certainly occurred within Auckland or within the parts of the country when I was involved with that.
The defense later called their own pathology expert to share his findings. He agreed with the other examiner that Grace died by strangulation. However, he believed that her injuries could have been sustained during an intimate encounter because there was an absence of defensive wounds on the body. He also argued that the bruises found on Grace's shoulders and arms were not necessarily consistent with restraints. He estimated that it could have taken between 5 to 10 minutes of applied pressure to her neck for her to die. While the first examiner believed that alcohol did not play any part in Grace's death, the defense examiner stated that alcohol could have played a role in her death. During investigation, it was discovered that Grace went to 3 bars and took several shots of different cocktails and tequila on the night she was killed. The defense examiner believed alcohol could have affected Grace's breathing that night. On November 22, 2019, after 3 weeks of trial, the jury deliberated for 5 hours to decide Jesse's fate and finally reached a unanimous verdict.
Do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty? Guilty. And are you all agreed members of the jury?
Yes. This jury, having found you guilty of the murder of Grace Emmy Rose Millane, you are convicted.
Although Grace's parents had lost their daughter, they welcomed the guilty verdict.
The verdict of murder today will be welcomed by every member of the Millane family and friends of Grace. It will not reduce the pain, the suffering that we've had to endure for over the past year.
In New Zealand, a guilty verdict in a murder case carries an automatic life sentence with the possibility of parole. In the case of Jesse Shane Kempson, prosecutors argued that he should be made to serve at least 17 years before becoming eligible for parole. On February 21, 2020, Jesse Kempson was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. In the aftermath of her death, Grace's family and loved ones came together and founded the charity called Love Grace. The charity was founded to help women who are affected by domestic violence. Grace was a lover of handbags and had a collection of bags she loved dearly. In like manner, The charity collects handbags and fills them up with toiletries for abuse victims. While Grace's family was trying to heal and move on, Jesse was making moves to appeal his conviction. However, in December 2020, the Court of Appeal dismissed his appeal. All the while, Jesse's case was in court. His name was suppressed by the courts and was not made known to the public until 2020. Love Grace has turned into a big-time charity organization and is doing a splendid job of keeping Grace's memory alive.
And when I speak to Gillian, she tells me that there's handed out over 10,000 handbags. Now, she describes that to me as 10,000 smiles. That is so touching.
As of December 2023, Love Grace had donated over 15,600 handbags in the United Kingdom and internationally.
Grace was a beautiful, talented, loving daughter. Grace was our sunshine, and she will be missed forever.
The Millane family will forever remember Grace as a smiling and fun-loving person. Her father has said that she will, in a small way, forever be a Kiwi. While thousands of people have found love on Tinder, the fact still remains that it is one of the scariest places to meet a person. Everyone posts seemingly normal pictures of themselves, but in truth they could be scammers, liars, or serial killers, and there are no warning signs when you swipe right. Would you be willing to give love on Tinder a shot? Yes or no? Let us know your opinion in the comments section.